I'd like to welcome everybody to the fourth in our series of lectures on strategic gaming. Today we're very excited to have Lieutenant Colonel Mary Lou Hall from J8 SAGD speak to us about how we are all McNamara's children. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mary Lou to get us started.
Hello, thank you for inviting us to participate in the Center for Applied Strategic Learning series of lectures on strategic gaming. I am Lieutenant Colonel Mary Lou Hall. I'm an Operations Research Analyst in a Wargaming office in the Joint Staff, and I'm here with Dr. Margaret McCown, who is also a political military analyst in our staff. And today I'm going to be talking to you about operations research and how it tends to get used, how operations researchers tend to think about problems, and some ways that OR intersects with wargaming. The title really is intended to be a pithy reference to Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara's pivotal role in bringing operations research from the business world to the service of the national defense. If you'll go to slide 2, please. The Studies, Analysis, and Gaming Division, SAGD, is nested within the Joint Staff J8. It's highlighted in yellow on the chart, on the organizational chart that you see here. We're responsible for conducting joint war games, integrated analyses, and assessments that address joint capabilities, force management, and resource allocation issues. We do this in order to continuously provide our Deputy Director, the J8, and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff with the best military advice. Our storied organization began as the Army Advanced Study Group established by General Eisenhower in 1947 and was later assigned to the Joint Staff in 1949. In our office, we currently have 6 military officers. All of us are 05s and 06s, meaning lieutenant colonels, commanders, as well as 1 Navy captain and an Army colonel. 3 of us are operations research analysts by trade, which is the topic of today's talk. The others are pilots. We also have 4 civilians in our office, 2 of whom are operations research analysts by trade. 1 is a defense policy analyst, and 1, Margaret, of course, is our political scientist PhD, and she's responsible for teaching the rest of us the art of wargaming. However, by and large, we all consider our job title to be political military analyst. Please go to slide 3. Historically, we have evolved as an analytical organization, performing studies, analysis, and gaming activities. Often these are all lumped together under the auspices of gaming. But the 5 of us in this office who are operations research analysts by trade know that these activities are separate and distinct, albeit complementary. As we learned from Dr. Perla in the first of this series of seminars, while operations research analysis focuses on systems, the true value of wargaming lies in its unique ability to illuminate the effect of the human factor in warfare. Wargames are really good tools for looking at messy, ambiguous, or otherwise difficult to specify questions that are less tractable to mathematical analysis. While I will come back later to the idea of how we use wargaming and OR analysis in a complementary way on the Joint Staff, I'd like to start off by telling you a little bit about the history of our organization and the role of an operations research analyst as I know it. Well, or as at least I knew it before winning the Joint Staff Lottery and coming to the Studies, Analysis, and Gaming Division in the J8. Please go to slide 4. In 1947, Chief of Staff of the Army, General Dwight D. Eisenhower, pictured on the left here, established a new organization within the Army, the Army Advanced Study Group. This group was to make recommendations about the effect of nuclear weapons on warfare. One of the founding members of this organization was Colonel Goodpaster. He's shown on the right here, later renowned as the quintessential soldier scholar, ultimately becoming the supreme Allied commander of Europe, the SACEUR, and later returning to service as the United States Military Academy superintendent in 1977. Shortly after he was assigned to the Army Advanced Study Group, Goodpaster received orders to graduate school and not long after earned 2 advanced degrees from Princeton University, a master's in engineering, and a PhD in international relations, and he returned to the Joint Advanced Study Group here on the Joint Staff. The original charter of this group was to evolve concepts of national security in light of advancements of the atomic age. The sole function of those young officers assigned to this group was to imagine warfare in the future and to think up suggestions accordingly. Please flip to slide 5. In 1962, Defense Secretary McNamara directed the establishment of the Joint War Games Agency, which by 1963 would operate outside the Joint Staff as part of an integrated effort between OSD and the Joint Chiefs of Staff, with game directors and observers provided by the Institute for Defense Analysis. Robert McNamara was the Secretary of Defense under Presidents Kennedy and Johnson and brought with him a new breed of quantitative analysis. Robert McNamara surrounded himself with a group of experts from the RAND Corporation known as the Whiz Kids in order to turn around the management of the United States Department of Defense in the 1960s. McNamara's purpose was to shape a modern defense strategy in the nuclear age by bringing in economic analysis, operations research, game theory, computing, as well as implementing modern management systems to coordinate the huge dimension of operations of the Department of Defense with methods such as the planning, programming, and budgeting system, depicted graphically here on this slide in the lower right-hand corner. It was McNamara's strong belief as the Secretary of Defense that the U.S. military should be managed using statistics. At the same time, many at RAND were exploring what could be done and learned using war games and the ways that more formal methods like game theory and some OR tools could improve their design and analysis. In this time in particular, they began efforts such as the development of the political military seminar game and also began to shift the emphasis of war games from the exploration of outcomes to different courses of action, to focus more on human decision-making, incorporating new work like that of bargaining theory. Although McNamara has been said to sometimes favor analysis even to the detriment of war games, the two fields were quickly evolving and becoming entrenched as defense analytic tools during the same era. As those changes in the wider field of OR and wargaming occurred, so did our organization, the Studies, Analysis, and Gaming Division. Please flip to slide 6. In 1968, SAGD's predecessor organization became part of the J5, and in 1970 it merged with the chairman's Special Studies Group to form the Studies, Analysis, and Gaming Agency. There were 4 subsequent changes in charter before it was reconstituted as the Joint Analysis Directorate in 1984. The J8, the Force Structure, Resources, and Assessment Directorate of the Joint Staff, which we are currently a part of, was actually established in 1986 and assumed the gaming mission from the J5, establishing the Politico-Military Assessment Division. In 1995, the Studies, Analysis, and Gaming Division, as we are known today, was formed and later assumed responsibility for the chairman's crisis management exercises in 2011. So lately, our division has been responsible for the chairman's strategic seminar series, which I'm going to discuss more about later. But included here is a picture from the first of the seminars that appeared in the New York Times this past September. The methods used predominantly in our office vary over time, dependent in a good part on the types of problems we face as well as senior leader preferences. These days, we are almost exclusively performing wargaming activities. But as you can see from our history and by both our organizational charter and our composition, OR and wargaming have been linked in our organization. We exist precisely where wargaming and operations research analysis come together. Slide 7. It is widely accepted that one of the most significant milestones in the evolution of the operations research discipline is the operations analysis done in response to the military needs of World War II, around the same time as SAGD came to be. The terms used to describe this work were operations analysis and weapons systems evaluation. It was later called military operations research, warfare modeling, and then combat modeling. The spectrum of OR spans from detailed, high-resolution microscopic analysis to highly aggregate macroscopic analysis. In a nutshell, operations research is the discipline of applying advanced analytical methods to help make better decisions. By using techniques such as mathematical modeling to analyze complex situations, operations research gives senior leaders the power to make more effective decisions and build more productive systems based on more complete data, consideration of all the available options, careful predictions of outcomes and estimates of risk, and the latest decision tools and technologies. Because the goal of operations research is to make more effective decisions and build more productive systems, it is sometimes referred to as the science of better. Slide 8. The operations research analyst takes a rigorous approach to formulate solutions to complex problems. The first step in defining the problem is the non-trivial task of understanding and formulating the problem to be solved. This requires the analyst to set limitations on the scope of the problem. In mathematical terms, we refer to these as bounds. We do this by developing and understanding the constraints, the limitations, and assumptions. The process of scoping the problem enables it to be decomposed to its simplest form, but no simpler. So while operations research analysts may be highly specialized in a quantitative field, they're often used within an organization as part of a team to solve an intractable business problem, to evaluate possible approaches in software solutions, and then to deploy the solution systems. The scope of that job description is really pretty broad for someone who needs to also have considerable depth in a quantitative field. This team, however, often comprises a mix of subject specialists and OR specialists. I think that one of the most important things an OR professional does for the decision maker is help determine to what extent OR could deliver improvements in response to the challenge or opportunity that the leader has in mind. So to some extent, this is expectation management. But it's also about helping the decision maker to truly prioritize system, if not organizational, objectives. The translation from problem symptoms to an understanding of the problem is usually an iterative one, involving guidance and buy-in from the ultimate decision maker along the way. Slide 9, please. So next, the OR develops an analysis plan. The definition process that we just completed provides considerable insight on how the solution will achieve our ambition of making the system better. Remember, OR is the science of better. So we need to carefully consider what measures will reveal what better looks like. Such measures are called metrics. Attributes like speed, accuracy, efficiency, or alignment with organizational values might be examples of metrics. So with a clear understanding of the problem in one hand and metrics with which to evaluate and compare alternative solutions on the other hand, the operations research analyst can create a vision of how one might present the solution. Now the analyst must select and apply the proper tool to achieve these results. Among some of the more common analytical technologies that an operations research analyst may leverage, there are the list that you see here. Starting off with simulation. Simulation provides the ability to try out approaches and test ideas for improvement. Both simulations and game theory create a mathematical model capturing the key characteristics of a problem, for example, operational plans. Simulations often then fit real data to the model to see how well it performs, or simulations are used to run many iterations of the model to see how it would work over many repetitions. Game theorists, in contrast, often do not work with empirical data, but instead use their models of strategic interaction to explore what equilibrium solutions to a problem might be, given the constraints specified in the model, especially when they are counterintuitive to what one might expect. The second here is forecasting. The application of inventory theory and forecasting techniques are used in determining demand and establishing procurement levels, procurement quantities, and lead times for major and secondary items. Optimization provides a mathematical set of equations that, when solved, narrows the choices to the very best. This is extremely powerful when there are virtually innumerable feasible options, and comparing them is difficult, if not impossible. Network analysis. Network analysis and transportation models are used for evaluating supply routes in operations plans and for project time and cost analysis. And of course, probability and statistics helps the OR to measure risk, to mine data, to find valuable connections and insights, test conclusions, and make reliable forecasts. The application of statistical theory and sampling theory are used in systems development and testing. So you can see that none of these analytical technologies are black box, push button, or turn the crank solutions. The role of the OR is to look for a variety of modeling approaches. And a critical aspect of this is to explore, develop, and understand key modeling assumptions. Research is always an inherent part of ensuring that you have the right model and the right data applied in a mathematically correct way. Slide 10, please. So the next step is to gather and review the data. In my experience, the data often comes from real-time transactional systems whose purpose is to facilitate real-time business processes, unfortunately and generally not to provide historical trends that might be useful in studying the historical system performance or for setting initial parameters. So the data may need to be archived, cleaned, and oftentimes compared against alternative sources. Data may need to be combined or transformed to derive the intrinsic information about system performance that will need to underpin the model. This really all comes under a larger heading of understanding the data. That in itself can be a laborious and often time-consuming task. To leverage any of these techniques previously discussed, like simulation, forecasting, optimization, etc., the analyst must decide the scenario to be tested and the appropriate method, also referred to as the appropriate mathematical formulation of the problem. The OR will ensure the quality of the data, that it's recent, cleansed if needed, and whether there is the ability to cross-reference to ensure it's accurate. This becomes an iterative process of choosing the method, understanding the data, comparing with research experience that has come before until you ultimately get the right combination of scenario, model, data, research, and issue expertise that can be used to conduct an analysis based on a model that is designed to provide an authentic representation of the system. Slide 11. Next, the analyst will construct and populate the model. So regardless of the modeling technique used, the OR analyst must distinguish the attributes of the system which the model attempts to change and the attributes of the system which the model attempts to replicate. Things that we can influence, that we can change in the real world, are represented within our model by decision variables. Thus, the model reveals how the system can be changed by making an alternative decision. So I'm going to use an optimization example to describe how an OR might construct and populate a model. In an optimization model, the problem is formulated so as to reveal the decision that will produce the most desirable solution, thus optimal. So in the following example, I will design an optimization that maximizes the volume of a box. The data that inform the model fundamentally fall into three categories: dimension, constants, and variables. As for the data, I have dimension, I have things that I can't change, we call those constants, and I have things I can change, the decision variables. Let's do a simple example. Slide 12. Here we have a decision to make. How big should the squares be that we cut out of a sheet of metal in order to fold it into a box which maximizes its volume, makes it as large as we possibly can make it? So you see here in the diagram the height, the width, and the length of the dimensions, or the indexes of the resulting box. Now I also have attributes of the problem that we either cannot or are not interested in changing. In this example, we are given a 12-inch by 10-inch sheet of metal. I also have a third category of data, elements of the problem that I wish to influence. In this example, in order to make the box, I will cut 4 identical squares out of a sheet of metal in order to fold it into a box. So in this case, the side length for each of those 4 squares, annotated by X in the diagram, is the decision variable. Finally, I explain using both English and mathematical equations that my goal here is to maximize the volume of the box. This is pretty simple annotation, but this type of simple annotation defining the problem before us is a transparent way to construct a model that clearly categorizes the data. A literal translation of how aspects of the analytical method represent aspects of the real-world problem can be extremely helpful toward making a transparent, repeatable process, whether here in an optimization model or in the formulation of a simulation or a statistical method or any other analytical method. Now, I bet you're dying to know the answer, so flip to slide 13. The graph in the upper left corner reveals all of the possible volumes that could be achieved, shown on the vertical axis here, compared with the size of the side of the square notches removed from the sheet of the metal across the horizontal axis. So notice that x, which is the side length of the sides of those squares, is limited to being between 0 and 5 inches. This is because the shortest edge of the sheet of metal is 10 inches long, so the largest side of a square you could have would be 5 inches long. So you can see from the graph that the maximum volume of 96.77 inches cubed would be achieved with square notches whose sides are 1.8 inches in length. Sort of a simple example. However, the other graphs that you see on this slide illustrate increasingly complex problems, modeled to reveal on the left below the maximum or on the right below the minimum. So of course the problem of maximizing the volume of a box can be solved by hand. However, the whole point of optimization is to model a problem whose dimensions and decision variables are so vast that it cannot be solved by hand or even portrayed graphically like we see here. That said, the algebraic formulation is well within reach, as is the software to solve the mathematical construct. So it's worth pointing out that in the case of a more complex problem, the model cannot be run until the syntax of the mathematical equations and the syntax of the data sets are correctly programmed into some sort of a solver, a general algebraic mathematical solver, and ultimately solved. I offer this only to illuminate the point that there is a considerable level of skill required to further bridge from the conceptual mathematical formulation to the often tedious and sometimes time-consuming process of effectively leveraging the available analytical technology, be it simulation, statistical analysis, or as in this example, an optimization, and actually run the model. Slide 14. So next, the OR analyst will run the model. But of course, the model results are not the answer. Moreover, the model seldom responds precisely as expected the first time. So the OR reformulates, questions, reruns, and compares the results, interpreting what the answers mean. The OR will even fight against one's own model and results, asking themselves, how are the assumptions showing up in the results? Are the results believable? Can we check them? Again, it takes time to analyze the results. Slide 15. So next, the OR goes about developing insights. Insights are not only interpretations and observations, but also sensitivity analysis, answering the question, how sensitive is the outcome of the optimal decision or the outcome of the set of alternative decisions to conditions that were held constant, that in fact may not hold constant, or to other decisions? Did the analysis answer the question the decision maker sought to have answered? Did it create new questions? The results and insights from the analysis are of no use if not presented back to the decision maker in a clear and understandable way, oriented to the decision maker, and answering the question of what decisions can be made to improve the system or process as measured by the metrics selected early in the problem-solving process. Finally, the OR works toward implementation, considering how business processes and systems need to be changed in order to put the results from the model into action in the business environment, likely discovering additional problems to solve, all while soliciting feedback and criticism, which is a healthy friction in the ongoing scientific process. Next slide, please. Slide 16. So, operations research is unique, employing highly developed methods practiced by specially trained professionals. It can be powerful, using advanced tools and technologies to provide analytical power that no ordinary software or spreadsheet can deliver out of the box. And of course, it's tailored to the decision maker, because an operations research analyst offers the decision maker the ability to define his or her specific challenge in ways that make the most of the available data and uncover the most beneficial options. You see here a photo of a victorious President Obama in the recent election. Turned out to be a win both for him and for quantitative analysis, turning the spotlight on both Obama's team of quantitative analysts and Nate Silver's election prediction. Slide 17. So as we learned in Dr. Perla's presentation, a war game is a warfare model or simulation not involving actual military forces in which the flow of events is affected by and in turn affects decisions made during the course of those events by players representing opposing sides. The key words in this definition are players and decisions. Wargaming is an experiment in human interaction. Without human players, there may be a model but no game. A true wargame is best used to investigate the decision processes of its players and how those processes interact, but it is not well suited to the calculation of outcomes. Furthermore, while wargames solicit decisions, wargaming sometimes analytically yields more insight into the impact of the structure of the problem on the options available to players and the variations in the efficacy of those options. This is to say, a wargame may reveal which constraints are most influential on both the availability and the efficacy of different decisions. This is a particularly useful insight when the wargame becomes part of another analytical study. For example, in this way, a wargame can provide a suggestion toward the relative importance of a parameter that data analysis may not reveal, or help begin to deconstruct a complicated causal relationship. I find it interesting that while game theory entirely and war games for the most part evolved to look at the impact of human strategic interaction, operations research analysis evolved from a business analysis background. From World War II to the present, there is a tradition of overlap between wargaming and operations analysis and the targeted problems of each. Speaking for myself, an operations research analyst, mechanical engineer, and former mathematics instructor, I certainly lean toward the World War II-induced tendency to see war as an engineering and supply chain problem, rather than as a social science problem. I think it's likely that for all political military analysts, our educational backgrounds and the targeted portions of the war problem with which we have been exposed shape our experiences and thus our perspectives. Slide 18. So the Department of Defense uses not only war games but also exercises and operations analysis to help learn about the strengths and limitations of its strategies, concepts of operations, and tactical and technical capabilities. And only by integrating the information that can be extracted from the proper application of all three of these processes will the defense community obtain a balanced and well-rounded understanding of the potential problems and opportunities of future combat. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Strategic Seminar Series provides an example that illustrates some of the possibilities. Please flip to slide 19. So in general enough terms to avoid classification, recently a question of great interest to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in light of anticipated budget reductions was how the Department of Defense would execute a particular strategy given alternative programmed forces and alternative crisis scenarios. As the chairman himself has explained, and I quote, "Since the new defense strategic guidance was released, the vice chairman and I have gathered with the service chiefs and combatant commanders for 3 full-day strategy seminars in Quantico, Virginia. We used these unprecedented forums to stress test the strategy against some of the most challenging security scenarios that we may face as a nation." End quotes. So analysis was used to construct models and devise methodologies to project the size of the inventory for these games, project the force flow over time, as well as to derive the concept of operations impacts resulting from known shortfalls. Other operations research analysts in other areas of the J8 perform this analysis as part of the annual sizing and shaping process that occurs within the J8. In addition, these OR analysts work closely with the combatant commands and the services who routinely exercise the forces similar to those envisioned in the proposed concepts of operation. This interaction helps the analysts better understand how those pieces can or should fit together. Informed by the results of this analysis, our division, the Studies Analysis and Gaming Division, has developed several iterations of this wargame, the Strategic Seminar Series, to explore the concept further. The Strategic Seminar Series wargame brings together the military commanders who might have to execute the strategy given this future joint inventory allocation, as well as senior civilian decision makers. And insights from each wargame of this series are carried forward to subsequent wargames and to the intervening analysis that goes on. So in such an integrated approach, the tools, analysis and wargaming, as well as exercises, at least insofar as they're proxied by discourse with geographical combatant commands, each strengthen and support each other. Analysis provides some of the basic understanding, quantification, and mathematical modeling of the physical reality that is required to assemble the war game. The game presents some of the data and conclusions of the analysis to its participants and allows them to explore the implications that human decision-making may have for that analysis, and it can illuminate political or other non-military, non-analytical assumptions and points of view, raise new questions, and suggest modifications to existing or proposed operational concepts. So by integrating them, the defense community gains a better and balanced understanding of the potential reality of future warfare. Slide 20. So this is precisely why it is useful to have operations research analysis involved in the wargaming activity, to provide a quantitative approach to examine complex issues and develop substantive insights, and to leverage a general understanding of game theory. The process of game analysis is much more akin to qualitative exploratory research and historical analysis than to the evaluation of physical experiments or systems analysis. On the other hand, most war games use a conceptual, if not always mathematical, model as found in operations research or systems analysis approaches to defense problems. Thus, the analyst must be well-versed in the characteristics, capabilities, and limitations of such models to understand how well or poorly they represent the reality of military operations and how appropriately they affect the play of the game. Slide 21. All games include a few key elements about which designers must make some choices. In all forms, design choices have implications for the conclusions one can draw from the game and often entail some trade-offs. Being cognizant of the implications of these choices and trade-offs does improve game design and analysis and is something that the operations research analysts, with their general orientation toward thinking about how to transform problems into empirically tractable form, can offer valuable insights, especially to problem framing and methodology. Although games instantiate real-world problems in a variety of ways and differing levels of precision and specificity, they share the basic aim of creating a space in which players consider their best decision, given the situation conveyed in the game and their expectations about other players' best choices. Games capture the problem of interest and the strategic interaction over it by defining a set of roles to be played. Rules telling the players what they should try to do, can't do, and a scenario filling in some details about the problems, especially what the payoffs of different choices might be to players, their goals, and other current events details. Some games represent these elements quite formally in mathematical models, and others vary qualitatively with a descriptive scenario and rules conveyed as simple taskings to the participants. Similarly, some games devise elaborate sets of rules and many detailed roles, while others convey them more generally or leave them implied in the scenario narrative. Slide 22. An operations research analyst may precede a game with a study encompassing quantitative analysis, helping one to identify important factors and drivers that should be incorporated into a game, or with a more formal model that you then transform into a more qualitatively specified game. In addition, the OR analyst may be in a good position to consider sampling issues, especially the extent to which the roles specified in the games and the individuals recruited to participate are representative of the population of decision makers that would usually be involved in addressing the problem in the real world. Anyone familiar with war games, but an OR especially, will have noted that the small n problem inherent in most war games, frequently there is only one iteration of a game, makes it hard to generalize very much from them and or to isolate which outcomes of the game were just path dependent. But of course, we know wargaming is not really about outcomes, but rather about decision making. An analyst with a methodological training of an ORSA may have a better ability to spot problems like the small n problem or to suggest some workarounds, or at least to recommend appropriate caveats to those writing up the post-game analyses. This is not to dismiss the value of an individual wargame. While there is only one game, there is the unique and rich opportunity to have experts from across the interagency, the services, the Joint Staff, the Office of the Secretary of Defense on one day combine their expertise in a way that offers a worldview that no one of those individual entities had previously seen. There are insights, what I like to call aha moments, that return with each of those game participants as seeds for intellectual endeavors in N organizations after the game is over. Slide 23. Finally, wargaming is also very developmental for the operations research analyst, as it helps strengthen his or her skills at assimilating diverse information and inputs not amenable to conventional quantitative methods, promoting buy-in and teamwork to develop common ownership of findings, recommendations, and insights, and generating policy options not previously considered. All of these skills are critical and attributes that the operations research analyst must cultivate in order to fulfill the previously described role of the OR as an arm of a decision maker with a vision for change, improvement, transformation, or innovation of existing business processes. Next slide, please. So here you'll find a list of references that I used in preparing this presentation that I think are useful from looking at wargaming through an operations research lens, and I would be happy to answer your questions.
This is Mike Dunn at the Army's Command General Staff College. Colonel Hall, my question for you is, how do you see ORSA techniques in wargaming being used as part of professional military education? Do you have any thoughts on that you could share with us?
How do I think that wargaming is being used as part of professional military education? Was that your question?
No, the question was, what are your thoughts on the use of ORSA techniques and wargaming as part of our PME?
Oh, I think it would be tremendously beneficial. I think there is so much overlap. I think part of today's presentation was to shed some light on whether you're a political scientist or a more quantitatively oriented engineering-type scientist, that the basic approach to military decision-making transcends the quantitative decision-making process. And so I think it would be useful in any type of an educational environment, especially, just to see a different process used in a different scenario.
Okay.
Maybe Dr. McCown has a few more thoughts on that.
Yeah, I remember reading an article or being told about an article from one of my former NDU colleagues, actually, that was looking at what students learned from war games. And one of the things that they learned the most from was actually building the game themselves. And I can envision a kind of a cool role in PME where you have, say, students building war games in their classes, and there I think students that are ORSAs would be a really interesting part of a team of students like that, because of some of the things that Mary Lou identified about the way they look at problems and have been trained to break them down into constituent parts to make them more tractable. And I think the best war games are ones that do a lot of hard thinking about what the sort of elemental parts of problems are and the causal relationships that we think form them before they even get as far as, writing a scenario or inviting people to come and play the game. And so I think in sort of curriculum design, if you had a population of students that includes operations research analysts and that are being tasked with building games, you could come up with some pretty neat techniques for enhancing learning.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, my name's Major Shermer. I've got a question. You on slide 8, you talked about decomposing down to the simplest, but no simpler. How do you know when you've reached bottom? I mean, what are your clues that you're not oversimplifying?
I think one of the biggest clues you have is when the result looks so much like your assumptions that you can't even distinguish it. You oversimplified it. You took it beyond its simplest form and have almost assumed away the problem. There should be something some aspect of every solution that's at least a little bit surprising to you, if you haven't oversimplified the problem, is sort of my thought, or at least that's been my experience. The other thing that I would say is, even when you think you've found the solution, I work heavily with, like I said, transactional data. Go back and see if you couldn't discover the solution that you found from the data before you started, can you go back into the data and find any indication again that your solution is right, that it could be true, if that's of any help? Do you have thoughts on that, Dr. McCallum?
As I am not an operations research analyst, not so many know. Although I think it parallels something that you wrestle with when you're building a war game, which is figuring out what the appropriate level of analysis is. And I think it's often done in a more intuitive way, but one of the rules of thumb that's good to keep an eye on is making sure that kind of the level of aggregation, and Ellie will smile when she hears me say this because we've worked on this a bit together, but the level of aggregation that you're taking for, say, roles that you identify is kind of consistent, so that you don't have some roles played by like a whole country and some by, representing a cabinet office or a community organization. And if you have to do that to meet learning objectives or something, be cognizant of how things at different levels of aggregation work kind of differently and so aren't necessarily directly comparable, so that you're not either giving students a sort of a false impression of what they can conclude from a game, or when you're writing up post-game analyses, giving that to readers. And I think the process by which you figure that out is often not that different from an operations research analyst, and that you kind of have to think back to what's the smallest unit of sort of analysis or aggregation that is relevant to the problem that I'm interested in. And that gives you sort of a rule of thumb for how you figure out how you're going to instantiate that in a game.
Amanda Pornell.
Hi.
I just wanted to make sure there was no one else in line. Okay, on slide 19, you give the example of a most recent cycle of analysis in here, and it seems to be focused more on force shaping, and I understand that's a key element of what JA does, but can you give any other examples of the cycle of an analysis that has been done recently? It's not just force sizing examples.
I'm struggling a little bit with a classification problem here. We have had other war games that have been 3 or 4 in the series, similar, not similar, but as the strategic seminar is now on its 5th in the series. I think anytime we have a war game that goes in multiple series, there's, if not leverage, there's certainly always an opportunity to do some sort of analysis in between.
And I think in, again, fairly general terms, the office has sometimes combined decision support and prioritization techniques with wargaming, where they use a more formal decision analysis tool to identify and rank different sort of decision options subject to some set of conditions, and then once they've kind of looked at what sort of priorities or best decisions seem like they might be, then followed with a war game that explores that in a more qualitative environment. And that kind of approach can sort of scale up from force structure to more typical political, military, and strategic decisions, where you're talking about more regional problems and that sort of a thing.
But that is really kind of what's really hard about it, because the topics that we're working with on the wargaming side are squishy. What's influencing the decision maker's decision? Not, it seems to me an easier problem to quantify it mathematically and say, what is the best decision given these circumstances? And we're so often struggling with that best decision, you can't even get there for non-mathematical reasons, for political reasons, for environmental reasons, for cultural reasons. So then you're trying to solve the problem of what's the best decision out of the ones that I could possibly get to. And I think that's where the opportunity, once a war game reveals where the breaks in the continuity of the efficient frontier are, sort of where the feasible decision sets are, you find that out from the war game. For political reasons or scenario kind of driven reasons, there would be an interesting opportunity to go back and then limit the options in some sort of a modeling, like a hierarchical decision making or a cost value model, to what's the best decision out of those ones that are left, maybe.
But in those cases, the commander, he's making his decisions in the war game based off of some sort of internal hypothesis. So you now have the opportunity then to explore what his hypothesis is and then evaluate it to confirm or negate it.
In the analysis or in the war game? What do you mean using the analysis after the war game?
Or in between war games. I mean, because when the commander makes his decision, he's got some sort of even if it's not informed by some sort of decision-making support methodology, he's got some sort of hypothesis in mind, or his staff has developed when they develop their options, has some sort of hypothesis in mind, and the decision in the war game is based off that. Now it appears you have the opportunity to then go and confirm or negate that hypothesis using analytic techniques.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. That would be a neat thing if you out that second order, not what the decision was, but what the hypothesis behind it was, and see if there's work where you could test that further. That's a good idea.
And I think that happens a little informally in that I've heard a couple times in recent games, because it must be sort of a buzzword these days, is theory of the case is this, and if that's so, then these types of decisions would make sense. And to the extent to which one heard that in a game and then some time elapsed before you did a subsequent game on a similar topic, it gives you a chance, if nothing else, comparing against, if it's a fairly current problem, comparing against current events and seeing if developments do seem consistent with that theory of the case, as it were, and then building a subsequent game that tested that in a more consistent or focused way, or that looked at decisions and options that would be contingent on that theory of the case being correct. We don't get a chance to do a ton of that, because a certain amount of what we do is, a lot of what we do is responsive to direction from outside our office, and so more response to immediate problems. Then that would require, I think, an office that was able to kind of set an agenda for the year and plan on taking relooks at topics.
Mm-hmm. Or an office that does it over multiple years.
Yes.
All right. Are there any other questions?
Ellie, I have a general question about your course. That one lecture I presented a few months ago, is this part of that course, or this is separate but related?
All right. So there are two series that CASL currently runs, and I'm answering this a little bit more broadly. The first of those series, and the older of the two series, is the Roundtables on Innovation in Strategic Gaming. That's the series that is primarily conducted as an in-person event, though sometimes there's an ability to call in and participate in a distributed manner. But those are not archived, they're not recorded. They do tend to be more on innovation and emerging best practices in the field. The series that this lecture is a part of is the lecture series on strategic gaming. This series is always going to be in a distributed format. and is recorded and posted online so that there is an archive of past events. And it's really focused more on best practices and perhaps for a slightly more junior audience than the other one, though, of course, I hope it's helpful to people across the spectrum. So, as you mentioned, this is now the fourth in our series. Dr. Perla gave the first one, Dr. Phil Sabin from King's College gave the second, and the third was given by Alec Barker for those who weren't able to tune in to past lectures. And those are all available on our website, as this one will be.
This is Peter Perla. I don't have a question. I would like to thank the speakers for their very incisive and useful description of OR and its combinations with gaming. I found some of those facts new to me, and I was happy to hear them.
Very much.
Well, with that, I think I'm just going to echo what Peter put so eloquently. I really appreciate all of you taking the time to join us, and of course our speakers, Lieutenant Colonel Mary Lou Hall and Margaret McCowan, for taking the time to talk to us today. On behalf of CASL, and particularly on behalf of myself and my co-host Katie Dusek, who's also on the line, I hope you'll be joining us next time, and thank you very much.